Day 310, November 6th, Believing 3, Faithlessness, 1 John 3 verse 23. And this is his commandment, that we should believe on the name of his Son Jesus Christ, and love one another, as he gave us commandment. 1 John 3 verse 23. Following Jesus is not all sunshine and fair weather. This is a lesson which the disciples learned well in our current passage. Just after healing many people and preaching the word in Capernaum, Jesus suddenly decided to depart from the crowds and cross over the Sea of Galilee. So Jesus got into a boat with his disciples and they set out for the other side. As they made their way across, which is about a 6-mile journey, the Bible tells us that there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with the waves. Matthew 8 verse 24. Such sudden storms are not uncommon in the Sea of Galilee, which is situated below sea level and is surrounded by mountains. Quite often and unexpectedly, strong winds race down from the mountains over the surface of the lake, generating storms and dangerous waves. This particular storm must have been especially fierce, for even the disciples, many of whom were experienced fishermen, feared for their lives. The waves grew taller and taller, and as they crashed over the sides of the boat began to fill with water. In Mark's account, we learn that the boat was filled with water, Mark 4 verse 37. We can only imagine the terror of the disciples, who were no doubt holding on for dear life as the boat was tossed about in the storm. Why had they left the safety of the shore? After all, there didn't seem to be any good reason to leave. Thousands of people had gathered to see and hear Jesus, and yet he had left them there. Then again, where was Jesus? As the disciples looked to Jesus, they saw that, even in the midst of the storm, he was sleeping. How could he sleep with all of the waves rushing over the sides of the boat? How could he have peace when death seemed so near? When the disciples awakened the Lord, they said to him, "Lord, save us, we perish." Matthew 8 verse 25. Jesus' response to their cry for help is truly remarkable, for he said, "Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith?" Matthew 8 verse 26. Apparently, even as the boat was filling up with water, Jesus saw no legitimate reason for fear. Not only did Jesus view the disciples' fear as unwarranted, but he even regarded it as worthy of being rebuked. Just consider the scene for a moment. The waves are crashing over the ship, the wind is howling fiercely, the disciples are soaked from head to toe, their faces are white with terror as they cry desperately to Jesus, and it is in that moment that Jesus rebuked them. Notice how his rebuke came in the form of a question, "Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith?" Matthew 8 verse 26. In this question, Jesus asks the disciples the reason for their fear and also gives them the answer. Their fears were great because their faith was not. We need to pause for a moment and consider this relationship between fear and faith. As Jesus implied, fear and faith are counter to one another. Thus, our level of fearfulness can be an indication that we are lacking in faith. But why exactly is it that fear and faith are counter to one another? To answer this question, let's consider the difference between Jesus and his disciples in the storm. Why was Jesus able to sleep peacefully while they were so terrorized? The answer is that the disciples, upon seeing the dangerous situation, began to expect the worst. As the water began to fill the boat, their minds began to worry that the boat would sink under the waves and that they would drown. Even though the boat was still afloat, and even though they were not drowning, their words to Jesus show that they considered death to be imminent. In contrast to their thinking, Jesus had no expectation of any loss of life. Even though he was well aware of the storm, he could just as well have kept sleeping peacefully. After rebuking the disciples, Jesus revealed the reason for his fearlessness, for he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. Matthew 8 verse 26. Jesus had no reason to fear because Jesus is God, and the disciples should not have feared because they were with Jesus. When Jesus rebuked the disciples for their lack of faith, he was rebuking them for their lack of faith in him, because he is the proper object of faith, and all who put their faith in him have no reason to expect evil, but rather should only expect good from his hand. Jesus had just finished healing multitudes of people, thereby proving that he was the promised Messiah, and the Messiah, who had such power, was not about to perish in a storm on the Sea of Galilee. Moreover, and maybe more significantly, Jesus had, in effect, guaranteed their safe crossing to the other side. Before they left the shore, Jesus had said, "Let us pass over unto the other side." Mark 4 verse 35. Certainly, after all of the miracles that Jesus had done, and after all of the glorious divine words he had spoken, the disciples had every reason to trust in the implication of these words, the implication that they would indeed pass over to the other side. When we examine the parallel passages in Matthew 8, Mark 4, and Luke 8, we discover that Jesus questioned his disciples more than once about their lack of faith. Immediately upon being awoken, and prior to rebuking the storm, Jesus asked, "Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith?" Matthew 8 verse 26. Then, after rebuking the storm, Jesus asked them, "Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith?" Mark 4 verse 40. And even with this, Jesus wasn't finished, for Luke records him asking, "Where is your faith?" Luke 8 verse 25. Now, by this time, the water was now calm, and the disciples' reaction to Jesus reveals more about the reason for their lack of faith, and they being afraid wondered, saying one to another, "What manner of man is this? For he commandeth even the winds and water, and they obey him." Luke 8 verse 25. From these words, it is apparent that the disciples still did not fully realize who Jesus was, and this was the cause of their unbelief. Many people, even Christians, tell us that fear is simply a natural God-given defense mechanism, and therefore that fear of death can be a good thing. But when we study our passage, do we see any indication that Jesus would have made such an allowance? If there was any moment where fear may have been warranted, it was certainly there in the middle of the storm, with water threatening to sink the boat, yet even there Jesus gave no space for fear. With that said, one might ask, shouldn't we take necessary steps to secure our safety in times of danger? Certainly we should. When Jesus slept in the storm, it was not to teach us inaction in perilous times, but only to illustrate the inward peace we must have by faith in the storms of life. Consider that when Jesus knew that the Jews near Jerusalem were trying to kill him, he avoided that area of the country, John 7 verse 1. Furthermore, when Jesus was teaching and the crowds began to press in upon him, he took the necessary precaution of teaching from a boat out in the water, Mark 3 verse 9. Jesus never instructs us to be foolhardy in the face of danger, nor does he teach us to neglect necessary precautions. Rather, he teaches us that instead of expecting the worst in perilous situations and torturing ourselves with fears, we must maintain confidence in his presence and rest in that fact that, whatever may occur, God is in control and is working it for our good. The Bible teaches us that even in seasons of danger, the saints of God, those with the wisdom of faith, have peace and rest. The Lord by wisdom hath founded the earth, by understanding hath he established the heavens. By his knowledge the depths are broken up, and the clouds drop down the dew. My son, let not them depart from thine eyes, keep sound wisdom and discretion, so shall they be life unto thy soul, and grace to thy neck. Then shalt thou walk in thy way safely, and thy foot shall not stumble. When thou liest down, thou shalt not be afraid, yea, thou shalt lie down, and thy sleep shall be sweet. Be not afraid of sudden fear, neither of the desolation of the wicked, when it cometh. For the Lord shall be thy confidence, and shall keep thy foot from being taken. Proverbs 3 verses 19 to 26. When the disciples were with Jesus in the midst of the storm, everything in them was telling them that they were going to perish, yet the truth is that they were perfectly safe. The same thing will occur often in our own lives. All of our circumstances will tempt us to fear the worst, but so long as we are following our Lord, we can be certain that even in the storm, we are safe. From all outward appearances, it may have seemed like the people who remained on the shore were more safe than the disciples who had followed Jesus, but this was only an illusion. All who follow Jesus will pass through many storms in this life, but to be in the storm with Jesus is far more safe than to be out of it without him. Remaining in the center of God's will is the safest place that anyone can be. Peter learned this lesson well, for after the resurrection of Jesus, when he was arrested for preaching the gospel and sentenced to be put to death, he had such peace that he was able to sleep in his prison cell. Acts 12 verse 6. If we are following Jesus, no evil can come upon us except that which is overruled by God for our good, and death cannot take us until our hour comes when He calls us home to our eternal abode. Consequently, there is no room left for terror in the face of danger, but only trust in the Lord, who watches lovingly over His saints and who has power to protect and deliver them. Jesus' words to His people are, "Be not afraid, only believe." Mark 5 verse 36.